G'day guys, it's Rick from Rick Chat RC. How you going? Welcome to the third installment of the Let's Build a Plane series. Now to recap, if you've seen part one, I showed you how to do the paint job, and for those of you who've seen it, you'll know what I mean. In part two, I showed you about the score and peel technique, which allowed us to fold the foam board over. And now get ready to see part three, which is simply about cutting strips of foam to create the formers for the internal wing structure, so that when we fold the foam board over, we actually help create the airfoil shape of the wing. So stay tuned, part 3 is coming up now. Okay, so here we go. We're about to cut the formers for the internal wing structure. I'm simply cutting the base formers first, starting with a width of 1 inch from the edge, top and bottom. This is a very simple process. We're really only cutting strips of foam. It's probably the easiest process of the whole build. So I'm using my straight edge and I'm clamping down the straight edge at each end so it doesn't move, and I'm about to cut through the foam board to create the first strip, which will be the base former. Now when I cut the foam strips, I score cut first, and then I make 2 or 3 or 4 or more cuts, going a little bit deeper each time. I find that with the quill foam, it's the best way to cut a nice strip without damaging the foam itself. And at the end of this, I get a nice clean cut. So just take your time, pay attention to detail, and you'll get a great outcome from this. So my first strip's about to come loose, come off, and I will have the first one cut and ready to go. There we have it, that's the first one. Now you don't need to see the other 3 being cut. It's the same old process, so I'm not going to bore you to death. So what I've done is time-lapsed the remaining 3, and then we'll come back to real time and I'll show you how I cut the final 2 top formers. So I've simply measured 1 inch out from the edge again, top and bottom. I've realigned the straight edge, and I'm making my cuts. So I've cut the 3rd one, and I'm about to cut the 4th one, and here we go, it's done. So now with this next step, I'm actually going to cut 2 additional formers which are 2 inches wide from the edge. These will be the top formers, which sit on top of the 2 base formers inside the internal wing structure. So I'm measuring 2 inches from the edge of the foam sheet, top and bottom, clamping down the straight edge as usual. Here I'm just quickly doing a quick measurement guide to see that the 2 1-inch formers are pretty much lining up with the 2-inch former. That's all good. And now I'm preparing to make my cut. So once again, I score the top section first, and then I make multiple cuts. It could be 2 or 3 or 4 or more cuts across the foam board until I get all the way through to the bottom. And I find this is the best way, the best process for getting a nice clean cut and a nice clean stripped cut. There we have it, that's the first top former. I'm just adjusting the foam board for the final time. My straight edge is clamped at both ends to the table. I'm measuring out 2 inches from the edge, top and bottom, and I will simply cut the final strip, which will be the second top former for the wing. Now I'm making 2 sets here because I'm using 2 wing halves. If you're only making 1 wing, then you only need 2 base formers, which are 1 inch wide, and 1 top former, which is 2 inches wide. So here's my final former. As I start to cut it, I score cut it first, and then I gradually go deeper with each pass. Gives me the best result, especially for this type of foam. And just be patient, pay attention to detail, and you'll get a great outcome from this. There we have it. The second former is done, cut, and ready to go. Alright, so here we have 2 sets. That's the first set now that I'm holding in my hands. I'm lifting them up there. That's the first one. And this is the second set. Top former and the 2 base formers. This is what it will look like as a guide inside the wing. The 2 formers together with the carbon arrow shaft in the middle, and the top former on top. Okay, that's one set, and that's the other set. You don't have to put the carbon arrow shaft, it just depends how you want to build the wing. So now I am going to prepare the actual wing so that I can glue the formers in place. So I'm measuring out 1 inch from the leading edge, and I'm marking on the foam board so that I know where the former will sit when I glue it in place. Now, you don't have to do this part if you don't want to, but I always like to prepare by putting down a guideline for myself. So I'm using the straight edge between the 2 markers. I'm going to draw a quick line with a pen so I know exactly where the former sits, and it also helps me to know where to place the glue without going over. So the first former will go there, which I'll glue into place. Make sure it's flush on each end. Looks good, feels right. And I'm just going to quickly grab the carbon arrow shaft, simulate putting it in place. That's where it will sit when it's inside the wing. And the second former will go directly behind it to create a nice snug fit for when you slide it in and out. Once again, I'm using the guideline as my guide for where everything sits before I glue it into place, and this is a quick test to see how the top former will sit. So I'm pretty much done this one already. So I've glued the base formers and the top former in place, and I've peeled off the paper from the top former also. And what I'm doing here now is I'm pressing down on the edge of the top former on both sides. Now I'm doing this to fatigue the foam and create a bit of a curve so that when I fold the foam board over to create the shape and the airfoil, it will be a smooth curve rather than a corner type bend. So this part's very easy, just using your fingers and your thumb, press down on the foam and you squash it down a little bit, and it gives you that very nice curve at the end. So from the middle to each end, I have done that on both sides, and it creates the curve that you need for when you fold the foam board over and create the to get the shape for the wing. Now it doesn't take much to do. I'm not really applying that much force. I'm just using my thumbs here to get the press down effect that I need. And it's pretty much done after this. I've already done the other side. And you'll see what I mean as soon as I fold that sheet over. So that's in essence what it looks like. And this is the result I'm trying to achieve, which I think I have. Look how nice that is. What a beautiful smooth curve. So there it is side on. I'll show you a bit of a close-up. So once I fold that over and glue it in place, I get that beautiful airfoil shape from the leading edge going back. And yeah, that curve is exactly the way I like it. Just doing a final test fold. All feels right, all feels good. It's ready to go. Just doing a final test fit with the carbon arrow shaft to make sure it's not sticking. Slides in and out nicely. And that's it. So now I'm doing the second wing half, and I'll show you a little bit more detail of what I went through. Now you don't have to do a second wing half if you're only building one wing half, but I'm going to join two together to get a bigger, wider wingspan. So I'm marking out the wing section again from the leading edge backwards about 1 inch, and this will form the guideline that I need, so that when I put the former down, I know exactly where it should sit as I glue it in place. So once again, I'm using the straight edge between those two markers, and I'm going to draw a line for myself using a pen or a pencil, whatever the case might be. Even a marker should be fine. You don't see any of this when you fold the wing over, it's all inside. Now I'm going to get the second wing here and join the two halves together temporarily to ensure that I'm getting the exact same fit and dimensions, since this is going to be joined together to form one wing. So I'm just making sure that the spacing and the dimensions and the measurements are the same. And I'm also going to use the carbon arrow shaft as my second guide to ensure that everything is straight and true when I glue down the formers on the second wing half. So I'm lining it up exactly the way it would sit together as one wing, making sure everything is aligned correctly. Placing the first former in position, it looks exactly straight and true. Just making some final little adjustments there, and then I'll have it glued down. So there it is, I've placed the hot glue in place there, and I'm using the straight edge to apply even pressure across the wingspan, and that will be glued in the next 30 seconds like so. Now I'm going to test fit the second former, snug up against the carbon arrow shaft, so it's not too tight and not too loose. And I'm also going to draw another guideline for myself so that I know exactly where the second former should sit behind that carbon arrow shaft. So I've moved out the carbon arrow shaft so to ensure that my line is straight and true right to the very end. And there's my guideline once again that I'm drawing. So I'm reaching for the hot glue. I'm using the guideline now and the position of the carbon arrow shaft to determine where I should put the glue so it's not too close to either edge. Position the second former in place, snug behind the carbon arrow shaft, making sure it's flush on each end, making sure the carbon arrow shaft is still sliding in and out, so it's not being glued into position because we don't want that, and using the straight edge to apply even pressure for the next 30 seconds so that it's glued into place correctly. Carbon arrow shaft still moving nicely, just ensuring that it's not being glued in place because we don't want that. And there we have it, that's the second one done. Carbon arrow shaft slides in and out nicely. So just doing some final checks, everything's flush. That's the end result basically. Now before I add the top former, just going to do a test fit. Making sure it's nice and fits correctly. And before I actually glue it into place, I'm using the carbon arrow shaft to create an indentation which will form the channel underneath that former. A channel where the carbon arrow shaft will sit nicely so that when the top former is glued into place, it will sit flush and flat with the base former so it doesn't rock from either side, because the carbon arrow shaft diameter is slightly thicker than the 5mm thickness of the foam board. So I'm just pressing lightly with the carbon arrow shaft in the middle and creating that channel, which I'll show you in a moment. So the foam fatigues nicely, it doesn't bend, it doesn't crack, it doesn't break. Just easy does it, and that's the channel I'm trying to achieve. It's worked beautifully. So now I'm inserting the carbon arrow shaft back into the wing, just ensuring that it slides in smoothly and snugly. It's nice and snug, it fits exactly the way it should. I'm happy with that. Now I take the top former, do a test fit, and that channel will sit right on top of the carbon arrow shaft, and everything fits flush, just the way I intended. It's worked nicely. Just doing a test pull and push with the carbon arrow shaft to make sure it's still snug, not too tight, not too loose. Making some final adjustments to make sure it's flush on each end, setting in the proper position, and once again drawing a guideline so I know where it should sit when I finally glue everything in position. Guideline on both sides. Here I'm just getting ready to use some weights to hold it down on one side. They're my 6S battery packs. You can use anything. You don't need too much weight, but just a little assistance helps. That's my little screwdriver set. An added weight on one side of the former. I'm going to use a straight edge on the other side of the former, which you'll see in a moment. So now I'm preparing to hot glue in place that top former. So once again, using the carbon arrow shaft and that guideline that I drew so that I know exactly where the hot glue should be placed without going too close to either side. We don't want to glue in the carbon arrow shaft. Placing the top former in position, using my guidelines as a guide, ensuring the ends are flush, and then using those prepared pieces of weight to to hold everything in position. And you only need to do this for the next 30 seconds, 45 seconds at the most. And the straight edge on the other side. Just hold it in position, apply some pressure, and it will all be dry in a matter of seconds. Here we have it. It's all done. Pretty much in place, dry and ready to go. Do another test fit with the carbon arrow shaft to make sure it's not sticking and to make sure it's nice and snug without being too loose. And now I'm going to peel off the paper from the top former so that when I fold the wing over, we will have foam glued to foam instead of foam glued to paper. That's the end of the second wing half.